The battle station was the largest arena in the known galaxy. It floated in the darkness between three star systems, a massive ring of metal and glass where the greatest warriors from 1,000 worlds came to prove their strength. Every cycle, the combat summit brought together fighters who had crushed armies and conquered planets. They came to show their power and earn glory for their species. This cycle was different. This cycle the humans had come. Jake Carter stood at the observation window and watched a warrior tear a training dummy into pieces with his bare claws. The alien stood 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that looked harder than steel. His arms were thick as tree trunks, and his yellow eyes burned with confidence. Around him, others cheered and roared their approval. "That's Commander," said Amy, stepping up beside Jake. "Undefeated in 40 cycles. They say he once killed a sand dragon with his hands." Jake nodded slowly. He was a simple man, 32 years old, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He had spent 10 years in the Marines before becoming a security contractor. He had seen combat on 3 continents and trained in fighting styles from a dozen countries, but he had never seen anything like Commander. "He's strong," Jake said. "Very strong," Amy agreed. She was 29, lean and athletic, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She had spent 6 years teaching hand-to-hand combat to Army soldiers before joining the security team. Like Jake, she watched everything with quiet attention. The combat summit had invited humanity for the first time. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 2 years ago, and most alien species still knew nothing about humans. They saw small bodies, soft skin, and no claws or armor or venom. They saw a weak species that had somehow built starships. A group of warriors walked past Jake and Amy. They were tall and thin, with 4 arms and faces like insects. One of them stopped and looked down at the humans with obvious disgust. "These are the Earth creatures," he asked his companions. "They send prey animals to a combat summit." The other made clicking sounds that might have been laughter. They walked away without another glance. Amy's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Jake put a hand on her shoulder. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "Words don't matter." They made their way through the station to find their assigned training area. The main facilities were enormous, with high ceilings and advanced equipment that could simulate any gravity or atmosphere. The best warriors trained there, showing off their techniques for admirers and rivals. The human training area was different. It was a small room at the end of a forgotten corridor, with bare metal walls and a simple mat on the floor. There was no equipment, no observation gallery, no comfort of any kind. "They gave us a storage closet," Amy said. Jake looked around the empty room and shrugged. "We only need the floor." A soft chime announced a visitor. The door opened and a diplomat stepped inside. She was shorter than the humans, with blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold deep curiosity. Her name was, and she had been assigned to observe the human delegation. "I apologize for these accommodations," said. Her voice was gentle and musical. "The summit organizers did not expect humans to need training space. They assumed you would only observe." "We train every day," Jake said. "It's what we do." Tilted her head, "Even when there is no battle coming." "Especially when there is no battle coming," Amy answered. "That's how we stay ready." Made a note on her data pad and left them alone. Jake and Amy spent the next hour exploring the station. They watched warriors practice with weapons that hummed with energy. They saw wrestling in pits of hot sand. They observed performing complex martial forms that used all 4 of their arms. Everywhere they went, aliens stared at them. Some pointed and whispered. Others laughed openly. A few made threatening gestures as if daring the humans to respond. Jake and Amy just watched and learned. That evening, there was a great feast in the central hall. Warriors from every species filled long tables, eating strange foods and drinking powerful drinks. The noise was incredible. hundreds of voices roaring and growling and clicking in their own languages. Commander sat at the head table, surrounded by his warriors. When he saw the humans enter, he stood up and raised his massive arms for silence. "Look," bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire hall. "The soft ones have come to watch us fight. Tell me, little humans, do you have warriors on your world? Or do you only have, what is the word, office workers?" The hall exploded with laughter. Aliens pounded the tables and stamped their feet. Some threw food in the direction of the humans. Jake and Amy stood still and waited. When the laughter finally died down, stepped closer. He towered over them, his scales gleaming under the lights. His breath smelled like copper and smoke. "Tomorrow," said, "you will show us how humans fight. You will demonstrate your combat abilities for the summit. I wish to see what kind of warriors the soft pink species produces." He said the word warriors like it was a joke. Jake looked up at the massive without any fear in his eyes. "We would be happy to demonstrate." His yellow eyes narrowed. He had expected fear or anger or perhaps a cowardly refusal. He had not expected calm acceptance. "Good," he said slowly, "good." He returned to his seat, but something in his expression had changed. Just a small shadow of doubt. Amy leaned close to Jake as they found their seats at a small table in the corner. "He thinks we're going to embarrass ourselves." Jake picked up a piece of strange purple fruit and took a careful bite. "Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Either way, we'll show them how we train." "Full contact." Jake smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Full contact. Around them, the galaxy's greatest warriors continued to feast and boast about their victories. None of them noticed the quiet humans in the corner, eating their strange food and saying little. None of them knew what was coming tomorrow. The next morning came early. Jake woke at 5 by Earth Standard Time, just as he had done every day for the past 15 years. His body knew the routine even when his mind was still foggy with sleep. He found Amy already stretching in their small training room. She nodded at him without speaking. Words were not needed. They had trained together for 3 years and knew each other's movements like their own. What they did not know was that the station's security system was broadcasting their training room to screens throughout the battle station. Someone had flagged the human area for observation after Commander's challenge the night before. Now, aliens in common rooms and private quarters could watch everything that happened. Jake and Amy began with simple movements, stretching their arms and legs, rolling their necks, loosening their shoulders. To the aliens watching, it looked boring and pointless. A few observers made clicking sounds of mockery. "The humans are doing a dance," one said. "Perhaps this is their combat style," another joked. "Very frightening." Jake and Amy moved into light exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, squats. Their movements were smooth and controlled, nothing impressive by galactic standards. The watching shook their heads in disappointment. Then the sparring began. At first it was slow. Jake and Amy circled each other on the mat, their hands raised, their eyes locked. They moved carefully, testing distance, looking for openings. To alien eyes, it seemed almost gentle, like two creatures afraid to touch each other. A warrior named High Arbiter was watching from his quarters. He was ancient, his gray skin hanging loose on his bones, but his mind was still sharp. He had seen more combat than most living beings, and something about the humans caught his attention. "They are studying each other," he said to himself. "Interesting." On the mat, Jake threw the first punch. It was fast, much faster than the aliens expected, but Amy blocked it easily. She countered with a kick to his ribs. Jake absorbed the blow and grabbed her leg. Amy twisted free and backed away. They continued like this for several minutes. Punch, block, kick, counter. Each movement flowed into the next. Neither fighter showed any emotion on their face. They were focused, intense, completely present in the moment. Danny, the communications officer aboard the human vessel, was monitoring the broadcast from the ship. He leaned forward in his chair as he watched his spar. He had seen them train before, but never in front of an alien audience. "Here it comes," he whispered. The intensity increased. Jake threw a combination of punches that would have crushed a normal human skull. Amy deflected two and took the third on her forearm. The sound of impact was loud enough for the microphones to catch. She grimaced but did not stop moving. She retaliated with a knee strike to Jake's stomach. He grunted and bent forward, but instead of retreating, he drove forward and grabbed her around the waist. They grappled, fighting for position, muscles straining against muscles. In the common room where warriors watched, the laughter had stopped. "Did you see that strike?" one of them asked. "I saw it," Commander answered. His voice was quiet now. The female took the blow and continued fighting. Amy got her arm around Jake's neck and squeezed. It was a choke hold, designed to cut off blood to the brain. Jake's face turned red. He had seconds before he would pass out. But he did not tap out. He did not surrender. Instead, he lifted Amy off the ground entirely and slammed her down onto the mat. The impact echoed through the small room. Any normal species would have been stunned or injured. Amy simply rolled with the fall, released her grip, and came back to her feet. She was breathing hard now, so was Jake. Sweat poured down their faces, but neither of them stopped. Throughout the station, more aliens began watching the broadcast. Word spread quickly. The humans were fighting, really fighting. "Why are they doing this?" a young asked. "They are both from the same ship. They are allies." "Training," Commander said, but his voice held uncertainty. The sparring reached a new level. Jake landed a spinning elbow that caught Amy on the cheek. Her head snapped to the side and blood appeared on her lip. She spit it onto the mat and smiled. Then she kicked him in the knee. Jake's leg buckled and he dropped. Before he could recover, Amy was on top of him, raining down punches. Jake covered his head and waited for an opening. When it came, he trapped her arm and reversed their positions. Now he was on top. Now he was striking down. Outside the training room, aliens had begun to gather. They pressed against the observation windows, trying to see what the cameras were showing. There were all standing together in stunned silence. "They are causing real damage," someone said. "Why would they hurt each other like this? Why does neither of them quit?" Commander pushed through the crowd until he reached the window. His yellow eyes were wide as he watched the two humans battle. They were smaller than him, weaker than him, softer than him. But they were still fighting. Jake finally caught Amy in a submission hold. He had her arm locked and was applying pressure. Any more and the joint would break. Amy did not tap out immediately. She fought the hold, trying to escape, her face twisted with effort and pain. Only when escape was truly impossible did she slap the mat 3 times. Jake released her instantly. They both lay on the mat for a moment, gasping for air. Then Jake stood up. He offered his hand to Amy. She took it. They smiled at each other, blood and sweat mixing on their faces. "Good session," Jake said. "Your elbow is getting better," Amy replied. And they began to circle each other again. Commander watched through the window. His scales had shifted color from dark green to something paler. In physiology, this meant deep unease. Behind him, one of his warriors spoke quietly. "Commander, your challenge for tomorrow. Do you still wish to proceed?" Did not answer. He just kept watching as the two humans continued to beat each other bloody, continued to get back up, continued to fight as if pain meant nothing to them at all. The crowd outside the training room had grown to over 300. Warriors from every species pressed against each other, all trying to see through the observation windows. Some had brought food and drinks, settling in as if watching a sporting event. Others stood in complete silence, their eyes never leaving the two humans on the mat. Inside the room, Jake and Amy were still fighting. It had been almost 2 hours now. Their clothes were soaked with sweat. Bruises covered their arms and legs. Amy's lip had swollen where Jake's elbow had connected, and a dark circle was forming around her left eye. Jake's nose was bleeding steadily, the blood dripping down his chin and onto the mat. Neither of them had stopped. The diplomat had pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She watched with her large, dark eyes, her data pad forgotten in her hands. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this sight. A young warrior named stood beside her. He was tall and thin like all his kind, with 4 arms that could strike from multiple angles at once. He had won many battles in his short life. He had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. "Why do they not stop?" asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Shook her head slowly. "I do not know." Inside the room, Jake threw a punch that connected with Amy's ribs. The sound was sickening. Amy bent forward, her breath leaving her body in a rush. For a moment, it seemed like she would finally fall. But she did not fall. Instead, she grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him off balance. As he stumbled, she drove her knee into his stomach. Jake doubled over. Before he could recover, she wrapped her arm around his neck in a standing choke. Jake's face turned dark red. His hands clawed at her arm, trying to break free. His movements became weaker as the oxygen left his brain. The aliens watched in horrible fascination. Surely now it was over. Surely the male would surrender. Jake did not surrender. Instead, he bent forward suddenly and flipped Amy over his back. She crashed onto the mat with tremendous force. Her grip loosened. Jake fell to his knees, gasping for air, his vision swimming. Amy lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. She had hit the mat hard. The impact had driven the breath from her lungs. Every part of her body screamed for rest. She got up anyway. They faced each other across the mat, both barely able to stand. Blood and sweat pooled on the floor between them. Their chests heaved with exhausted breaths. And they raised their hands again. "Impossible," Commander said. His voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This is impossible. They should be finished. They should have stopped long ago." Danny had come down from the ship to witness the final stages of the training session. He saw the alien commander and walked over to him. "Can I explain something?" Danny asked. Looked down at the small human. Normally, he would have ignored such a creature. Today, he nodded slowly. "Your warriors train to win battles," Danny said. "You train to defeat enemies. That is good. That is important." He pointed at the window where Jake and Amy were exchanging slow, exhausted punches. "We train for something different. We train to keep fighting after we should have stopped. We train our bodies to ignore pain, to push through exhaustion, to refuse to quit even when every muscle is screaming for rest." His yellow eyes narrowed. "Why would you do this to yourselves?" Danny smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew terrible truths. Because on our world, the winners were never the strongest. The winners were the ones who kept going after everyone else had stopped. Inside the room, Amy finally completed a successful submission hold. She had Jake's arm locked behind his back with her legs wrapped around his body. There was no escape. The hold was perfect. Jake did not tap out. He waited, his face twisted with pain, his shoulder approaching the point where it would break. Amy applied more pressure. Still, he did not tap. "Tap out, you idiot," Amy hissed through gritted teeth. "Make me," Jake replied. Amy looked at his face. She saw no fear there, no desperation, just calm determination. He would let her break his arm before he would surrender. She released him. They lay on the mat together, too tired to move. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing. Then Jake started laughing. It was a weak laugh, more of a wheeze really, but it was genuine. Amy joined him. They lay there bleeding and bruised and exhausted, laughing like old friends sharing a private joke. The aliens outside the window did not understand. How could they laugh? How could they find joy in this brutality? Finally stepped away from the window. Her hands were shaking. She had seen things today that would change her understanding of the galaxy forever. The young warrior followed her. "I must speak with them," he said. "I must learn how they do this." "You would learn to suffer?" asked. "Thought about it carefully. I would learn to continue despite suffering. There is a difference." Back at the window, Commander stood alone. His warriors had drifted away, too disturbed by what they had witnessed. Only remained, watching as the two humans finally pulled themselves to their feet and limped toward the door. One of his lieutenants approached carefully. "Commander, about tomorrow's demonstration, the one where you were going to challenge the humans." Was silent for a long time. "Cancel it," he finally said. "Tell them I have scheduling conflicts." "But Commander, you have been talking about this for days. You said you would show the galaxy how weak humans are." Turned to look at his lieutenant. His scales had gone even paler than before. "I have seen enough," he said quietly. "I have seen more than enough." He walked away without looking back at the training room. Behind him, Jake and Amy finally emerged into the corridor. They were leaning on each other, barely able to walk, smiling despite their injuries. Every alien in the corridor stepped aside to let them pass. No one said a word. That evening, there was a diplomatic reception in the station's grand hall. Unlike the feast the night before, this was a formal event. Warriors wore ceremonial armor instead of battle gear. Diplomats mingled with military leaders. The atmosphere was calm and civilized. But everyone was talking about the humans. Jake and Amy arrived late. They had spent hours in the medical bay, getting their wounds treated and their bruises wrapped. Jake's nose had been reset, and Amy's ribs had been scanned for fractures. The doctors had wanted them to rest, but they had refused. "We have a job to do," Jake had said simply. Now they walked through the reception hall, and every eye followed them. The mockery from the night before was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. Found them near a refreshment table. She was carrying her data pad, ready to record their conversation. "May I speak with you?" she asked politely. Jake nodded, "Of course." They found a quiet corner away from the crowd. Looked at them carefully, studying their faces for any sign of the trauma they had endured just hours before. She saw bruises and bandages, but also calm, steady eyes. "I am preparing a report for the Galactic Federation," explained. "They wish to understand human combat capabilities. I have watched your training today, but I have questions." "Ask," Amy said. Hesitated. The question she needed to ask felt almost too personal, too intrusive, but she had to know. "Do humans not feel pain?" Jake laughed softly. It was not a mocking laugh, just gentle amusement. "We feel everything," he said. "Every punch, every kick, every joint lock, we feel it all." His eyes widened. "Then why did you continue? Any rational being would have stopped when the pain became too great." Amy considered the question carefully. "Because pain is just information. It tells us something is wrong. It does not control what we choose to do next." "I do not understand." Jake leaned forward. "Let me tell you a story. When I was training to be a Marine, we had an exercise called the Crucible. 54 hours of combat training with almost no sleep and very little food. By the end, every muscle in my body was screaming. I could barely see straight. My feet were covered in blisters." "And you continued?" asked. Everyone continued. Not because we could not feel the pain, but because we had decided that finishing was more important than comfort. The pain was just noise. The mission was what mattered. Wrote rapidly on her data pad. "This is difficult for me to accept. Among my people, pain is a signal to stop what you are doing. To continue despite pain is considered irrational." Amy shook her head. "Not irrational, just trained. We do not ignore our pain, we acknowledge it, accept it, and keep moving." "But why would you train this way? What purpose does it serve?" Jake's expression became serious. "On Earth, humans were not the strongest animals. We could not outrun predators and we could not fight them with claws or fangs. What we could do was keep going. We could chase prey for hours, for days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. We could survive wounds that would kill other creatures. You evolved to endure, said slowly. Exactly, and our training just takes that natural ability and makes it stronger. Across the room, High Arbiter was watching them. The Ancient had spent the day reviewing human military records, searching for any explanation for what he had witnessed. What he had found had disturbed him deeply. He approached the small group, his old bones creaking with each step. I have questions as well, he said. Your records speak of soldiers who continued fighting after receiving wounds that should have been instantly fatal. Humans who kept fighting with missing limbs, with destroyed organs, with injuries that our warriors would never survive. Jake nodded. Yes, it happens. How is this possible? Amy answered. Fear of death is strong, but for some humans, the will to protect others is stronger. When someone you care about is in danger, the body becomes capable of things that seem impossible. Was silent for a moment, and you train to awaken this capability. We train to be ready when it is needed, Jake said. We hope we never need it, but if the moment comes, we will be prepared. The High Arbiter bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture of respect that he had not shown to anyone in decades. I have misjudged your species, he admitted. We saw soft bodies and assumed weakness. We were wrong. Later that night, after the reception had ended, there was a knock on the door of the human quarters. Amy opened it to find a young warrior standing in the corridor. It was the one who had watched their training so intently. I apologize for disturbing you, he said, but I must ask something. Come in, Amy said. Stepped inside nervously. Jake was sitting on a bench, wrapping fresh bandages around his hands. I watched you today, said. Both of you. I have won many battles, but I have never seen warriors like you. We are not special, Jake said. We are just well trained. That is why I am here. Straightened his thin body, trying to find courage. I wish to learn, not your fighting techniques. I have my own techniques. I wish to learn how you train your mind to ignore pain. Jake and Amy exchanged a look. It is not a quick lesson, Amy warned. It takes years. I have time. Jake studied the young alien for a long moment. He saw genuine respect in those strange insect eyes. He saw a warrior who wanted to become something more than he was. We start at 5 tomorrow morning, Jake said. Earth Standard Time, be ready to suffer. Nodded eagerly, I will be there. After he left, Amy sat down beside Jake. You think he can handle it? She asked. Jake shrugged, only one way to find out. Outside their quarters, the station hummed with quiet conversation. The combat summit had taken an unexpected turn, and everyone was trying to understand what it meant. The humans were no longer a joke. They were something else entirely. They were a mystery that demanded respect. The final day of the combat summit arrived with a sense of tension that had not existed at the beginning. What should have been a celebration of galactic martial prowess had become something different. The mood had shifted, and everyone knew the humans were the reason. Jake woke early, as always. His body ached from the previous day's training, but he pushed the pain aside and began his morning routine. Stretching, breathing, preparing his mind for whatever the day would bring. There was a knock at the door. When Jake opened it, he found himself face to face with a warrior. Not commander, but a younger one, slightly smaller but still towering over the human. This was second in command. I am not here to fight, said quickly, seeing Jake's posture change. I am here to ask. Jake relaxed slightly. Ask what? Looked uncomfortable, for to show uncertainty was rare. I watched you spar yesterday. I have watched the recordings many times since then. I have questions that trouble me. Jake stepped aside. Come in. Amy was already awake, standing in the corner of the room with her arms crossed. She watched with careful eyes, moved into the center of the room and stood there awkwardly. He was designed for battle, not conversation. Finding the right words was difficult. "Commander is the greatest warrior I have ever known," finally said. "He has defeated enemies twice his size. He has survived wounds that would kill any other. He fears nothing." Jake waited. "But yesterday," continued, "when he watched you fight, I saw something in his eyes that I have never seen before. He was afraid. Not of you personally, not of your strength or speed. He was afraid of something else." "What do you think scared him?" Amy asked. Shook his head slowly. "I do not know, that is why I am here. I need to understand." Jake sat down on the bench and looked up at the massive alien. What scared him was the realization that strength alone is not enough. He saw two beings with half his power refuse to stop fighting despite pain and exhaustion and damage. He saw something that he cannot match, no matter how big or strong he becomes. "What is it?" "Will," Jake said simply. "The decision to continue when every part of you screams to stop. The ability to accept pain and keep moving forward. That is not something you can build with muscles." Was silent for a long moment. His scales shifted colors as he processed this information. "Can it be learned?" he asked. Amy stepped forward. "It can be trained. It takes time and suffering and failure. But yes, it can be learned." "Will you teach me?" It was not the question Jake had expected. He looked at Amy, and she raised an eyebrow. "We would have to spar," Jake said carefully. "Really spar. Not to hurt each other permanently, but to push each other. Could you do that without killing me?" Considered this seriously. "I would have to learn control. Do not train for control. We train for maximum damage." "Then that is where we start." They moved to the training room, the same small space where Jake and Amy had fought so brutally the day before. The bloodstains were still visible on the mat. Jake and faced each other. The size difference was almost comical. Jake looked like a child standing before an adult. "We go slowly," Jake instructed. "Show me your basic attacks. I want to see how you move." Threw a punch at half speed. Even controlled, it was incredibly fast and powerful. Jake slipped to the side and let it pass by his head. "Good again." They continued like this for an hour. Attacked, and Jake defended, dodged, and occasionally countered with light touches that showed where he could have struck. It was a strange dance between two completely different beings. Then landed a blow. It was not intentional. His arm moved slightly faster than he meant, and his fist connected with Jake's ribs. Jake flew backward and crashed against the wall. He slid to the ground, gasping for air. Froze in horror. "Human, I am sorry. I did not mean to." Jake held up his hand. He took a few deep breaths, testing his ribs. Nothing was broken. He pulled himself to his feet. "Good hit," he said, and he smiled. Stared at him with wide yellow eyes. "You are not angry." "Why would I be angry? This is training. Mistakes happen. You learn from them." "But I hurt you." Jake walked back to the center of the mat. "Yes, and I will recover. Now let us continue." They trained for another 2 hours. By the end, had learned to control his movements better, and Jake had learned to read body language. They were both exhausted. At some point, Commander had arrived at the observation window. He stood there silently, watching his second-in-command learn from a creature half his size. When the session ended, Jake noticed watching. He walked to the window and looked up at the massive commander. "Your subordinate learns quickly," Jake said. Scales were still pale, but his expression held no hostility. "He told me he wanted to understand what makes humans different. I did not believe he would find an answer." "Did he?" Nodded slowly. "You do not fight to win. You fight to refuse losing. There is a difference that I did not understand until now." Amy joined Jake at the window. "Does this bother you?" "It did," admitted. "Now I think it is something we should learn. Perhaps strength and endurance together would create something greater than either alone. Later that day, the Combat Summit held its closing ceremony. Representatives from each species gathered in the central arena for final speeches and recognition of outstanding warriors. High Arbiter took the stage, his ancient voice carried across the vast space. "This summit has brought us unexpected lessons," he announced. "We came to celebrate strength and skill, and we found something we did not anticipate." He gestured toward the small human delegation. "The humans have shown us that true warrior spirit is not measured in size or power. It is measured in the refusal to surrender when all seems lost. They have earned their place among us, not through victory, but through endurance." The arena fell silent. Then, one by one, warriors began striking their weapons against the ground in the traditional gesture of respect. The sound built like thunder, rolling across the gathered fighters from 1,000 worlds. Jake and Amy stood quietly, accepting the honor without pride. Later, as their ship prepared to leave the station, transmitted her final report to the Galactic Federation. "Humans do not train to fight," she wrote. "They train to endure. They have learned to accept pain as a teacher rather than an enemy. They have evolved beyond simple combat into something that defies easy understanding." She paused, considering her final words carefully. "I recommend that future dealings with humans include this knowledge. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest or the most advanced, but they may be the most dangerous because they simply refuse to stop." On the human vessel, Jake and Amy returned to their quarters. Their bodies were battered and sore. They had earned those injuries through 2 days of brutal training in front of hostile aliens. "Same time tomorrow?" Amy asked. Jake grinned through his swollen lip. "Same time tomorrow." Outside the window, the stars stretched into infinity. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was beginning to understand that humans were not to be underestimated. Not because of their strength, because of everything else.